thing.
It's glued down, doesn't it?
Yeah, that thing's glued down. When you get it through the hole, through the.
All right, only one. That one can go back in there.
Good.
Thank you.
Got that where you said. You know what number He Lives was in the Coachberry hymnal?
What's that?
82.
Really? How did you know that?
Because every Sunday night, that's all we were singing at the old Wesley Methodist Church in Jackson, Mississippi. He lives, he lives. Blessed Assurance was 82.
Right under that way.
That's where it's at.
It's not a Bible. Let's switch it up to that. Hey, Rob, can you move that over?
Which way?
Into that pool. There we go. I'm good there. All right.
Everyone, if you'll start to gather and sit down, we'll get started in a minute. Good morning. Go ahead and get seated so we can get started. And if you can tell, I'm not used to holding a microphone, so bear with me. Okay, welcome everyone. We are running a couple minutes late, but we'll have this up and going in just a second. I'm Elizabeth Holstein, a member of the Genesis class, and I am pitch hitting for Ruthie this morning. So just bear with me. As I said, I'm not really good with a microphone. We are on our second class of the Summer Soul Food series on Psalms, and we will be doing lesson 6 today if folks are following along in the book, which is on Psalm 103. I have 2 announcements that Ruthie wanted me to mention. One is for the Sunday school classes to please enter your attendance in Realm, and that's for the leaders of the classes. If you could jot down the folks that you have here and do that, that would be great. And then the other thing is we will be in the gym next Sunday for the Sunday school hour. So please join us then. And finally, I'm going to introduce Steve. Steve Carter is our teacher for the next 3 Sundays, I believe, 3 or 4?
4 Sundays.
4 Sundays. And he is, Ruthie gave me his bio because I had not met him. And it's very long and impressive. He's been an architect for many, many years, doing a lot of work in the governmental arena. And the thing that I took from it was that he was a Clemson grad. That's where his first, and if you know me, you know that's why that stood out for me. But I'm going to turn it over to him and let him open us in prayer and then move forward with the lesson. So thank you so much. We appreciate you being with us. You're good.
All right. Is this working? Not working. What? All right. How about now? If not, I'll use the microphone. Okay. So I need to work this from over there. I think it's working now. Can you hear? All right. Look, this is a new experiment. So there will be glitches. I hope no one will be hurt. But we'll get through this, and maybe by the time we finish the 4th Sunday, we'll have this down pat. As Elizabeth said, this is a part of 4 Sundays. We will go, still not. Maybe I need to do this. I haven't spent my life in front of a microphone, but as I say, this is a part of 4 Sundays, and this is the first Sunday that we're going to do as we look at the Psalms, and hopefully in some different ways. Just a bit more to add a postscript to what Elizabeth has said. The Clemson part is absolutely correct. There is another part. Last weekend, my bride and I celebrated 50 years of marriage. And thank you. Now, she would normally be here, and it's not just because the Wimbledon finals are going on right now, but that is, I'm sure, a part of it. But she's actually in Seattle. She took 2 of our grandchildren back to Seattle and is taking one of them on a safari experience for next week. So she may or may not be watching. She knows how to get to the live stream. So we did celebrate that 50 years. There was another anniversary last weekend, and that was for 40 years we've been a member of this church. It has been a real blessing in our life. I was not of this tradition when I married this woman 50 years ago. Part of the prenuptials was that I would give up my previous faith tradition to come over to the enlightened side on the Methodist. And I did that. So far, so good. So I have had the opportunity while being here for 20 years to teach in the New Beginnings class. Some of those remnants are here this morning. Thank you for coming. And then more recently to teach every now and then with the Joy class. So I have had an opportunity to get to know many of you. I don't profess to know all of you. What I'm going to do this morning is to run through a new number of PowerPoints. And I understand death through PowerPoint. So if any of you are feeling close to expiration, feel free to leave. I'm okay with that. We can get through that. So we'll see how this goes this morning. We have been, in the last several Sundays, looking at the Psalms as prayer. What James did this morning was really an introduction, and this is not planned. It's just the way Clemson minds work in sync. That we talk about the Psalms as praise and prayer, but the Psalms are more than that. The Psalms really begin to get at what is a pathway of life if we really get into the Psalms. So what I want to do this Sunday and the Sundays that are coming is to look at perhaps the philosophy, at least the psychology that exists in Psalms. And let me say that I've not had one single class in either. Psychology, philosophy, so I'm winging it here, but I want to wing it with you as we look at the Psalms as an indication of pathways for our lives. Now, beyond poetry and prayer, we looked at what Martin Luther said. And Martin Luther was living around 1280 in the Common Era. But Martin Luther, as we know, had a pretty strong belief about the Christian church in the Reformation. And he said, the sum of all is that if you wish to see the holy Christian church depicted in living colors and given a living form in a painting, a miniature, then place the book of Psalms in front of you. You will have a beautiful, bright, polished mirror which will show you what Christianity is. Now, this is very important. The Psalms are not Christian documents. We have incorporated them in our church, in our Christian beliefs, as a part of reinforcing our approach to God. Also, how do you read the Psalms? Again, James talked about that this morning. How do you actually read the Psalms? My advice has always been to start with an accessible book, and I suggest that you start with the Psalms. Now, people will say, oh, but the Psalms are so pretty and musical. Shouldn't I take something stronger? If you read the Psalms, read them all, and read them at a pretty intense clip. Don't spend a year doing it. Do it over the course of a few weeks. I suggest to you that perhaps the 3 weeks now, 4 Sundays that we've got here, might be a good time to actually pick them up. Just start reading them. Don't read them to actually be an examination type reading, but read them to see the flow, the messages in there. So read them over a couple of weeks, and you will find that the 150 Psalms, such an acute range of human experience that you'll think it's been written by your therapist. Now, that was said by the minister, Peter Gomez, in the Memorial Church on Harvard Square in Harvard. So we know something about what Martin Luther said. We know something about now how to read the Psalms. So let's look at the influence of the Psalms. Did we actually believe the Psalms? Have we actually taken on board what the Psalms are saying? So there is plenty to look at from that. Any of you recognize this person? Now, some of you in here should. You're old enough. I can see your faces. Okay, all right. We won't dwell on it. This is Dag Hammarskjöld. Dag Hammarskjöld was Secretary General of the United Nations back in the late 50s and the early 60s, very early 60s. On his travels around the world, Dag Hammarskjöld always took 3 items with him. These items were found in his briefcase that was recovered after the plane crash that took his life in September of 1961. I can remember that. It was September 18th, 1961. A copy of the New Testament, a copy of the Psalms, and a copy of the United Nations Charter. To me, this says an awful lot about how the Psalms influence so many people. And I could show you so many more pictures up here of people who have been influenced by the Psalms and have used the messages in the Psalms to really do secular kind of things in a secular world. And that's what Dag Hammarskjöld really represented. But we got to remember, the Psalms were written by Jews for Jews. And so what we have to do is to place ourselves in their moccasins for a while and to say, what were they thinking when they were singing these songs? And as you know, most of them are songs or they are prayers. But what was going on in their life at that time that would have influenced those songs? They've had a pretty checkered past, as you know. If you look at the period of the Psalms, and we're going to come at that here in just a minute, we've got the story of Adam and Eve that's reflected in the Psalms in many ways. We have the Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, the 5 sections of the Psalms. Again, this is the Jewish people trying to reflect their experiences through praise and prayer. We know they also experienced some very difficult times. There were times where they strayed away from God. The Psalms really reflect that as well. The times that they had doubt, much doubt is reflected in the Psalms. We know that their aim for many, many, many generations, centuries if you will, was to build the temple. They built the temple. And there they felt that that was where the presence of God was, and the Psalms can reflect that. You can read the Psalms that express the exhilaration that they have about just being in the temple. But we also know that the temple was destroyed, and many of the Psalms were written during the period of exile. So you can get the lament that is a part of the Psalms reflected in some of them that talk about what it's like to be exiled, to be removed from the God that you worship. So written by the Jews, for the Jews. But if we go back to what Martin Luther says, they are a depiction of the Christian church. Then the space, time, and context within which they were conceived is important to understand the Christian tradition. So yes, we borrowed from them. We may have even abducted them in our Christian denomination. But they were all about people in relationship, seeking relationship with the God, the same God that we worship. So if we look a little bit at that time frame, this is basically the span of the Psalms. I say basically. Some people believe that they were written over a period about 500 or 600 years. Some biblical scholars say no, because Moses has a psalm or some attributed to Moses is in there. It's got to go back earlier than the roughly 1900 era, before the Common Era. And it's got to reflect some of the views of the children of Israel way back then. So 1,000 years. Think back 1,000 years right now. If you were going to collect important writings that have been done over the last 1,000 years, you would go back to around 1200. Some of you may have been alive at that time, but some days I feel like it. But that time was a time where things were really changing in Europe. We weren't even discovered yet, so it was all about Europe. But it was about the time that Martin Luther was posting his famous writing on the church in there. So we need to put things in context, and a lot has happened in those 1,000 years. So I'm just trying to suggest that when we pull together, when the book of Psalms was pulled together, really along about, they're suggesting maybe 500s before the Common Era, when it was first assembled as a collection of prayer, praise, and thoughts, then we need to recognize that was quite an effort to pull all of those things together. So context is really important. And that's what these next 4 Sundays are going to look at, is how do we use Psalms in the context of how we're living and where we're living and what we're living in at the present time. So here's how I plan to teach. The first Sunday, which is today, we're going to address honesty and truth. And I say that if nothing else, the Psalms really demands our honesty with ourselves, with our community, and with the divine source of love. That it requires us to be honest. It requires us to approach God with honesty. Kind of got to lay it all out there. If we can't do that, the rest of the Psalms are not going to be as effective as I think they could be. So today we're going to look at that. And the next week we're going to look at, from my Baptist tradition, you can't get very far from evil and sin. I went to enough tent revivals, responded to enough altar calls to know that that is a big principle of that faith tradition. Of evil and sin. We're not going to run from it. You know, it's out there. We may call it some different things. We may try to be sophisticated, but that's what it is. There is evil that's in the world. There was evil in the world at the time the Psalms were written. And the words that they said at that time, do they help us out in how we might look at it at this time? So it can't be avoided, but it can be confronted through honesty and truth to ourselves and to our community. So we'll try to look at that. Where do we stand with that, the fact that evil exists in our society? The third Sunday, we will look at justice and mercy. Though seemingly harsh at times to Western cultures, at their very core, the Psalms provide the basis for restorative justice and sustainable mercy. I spent a lot of my time working with a lot of different jurisdictions in this country and beyond this jurisdiction, and issues related to the justice system. And a big part of what I try to do is to ask and to try to understand their definition of restorative justice. And we're going to look at the Psalms and see if that gives us any clues in there about how justice should be shared equally among all people. And we'll look at it in light of today's times. How well are we doing with respect to a restorative justice and sustainable mercy? And then last, we'll look at hope and inspiration, and maybe that will become aspiration. but at least hope and inspiration as prayers and poems that span the lives of a chosen people for 10 centuries. The Psalms offer a foundation for hope and inspiration. We are already experiencing that through the sermons that we've had thus far. Today's was particularly good, I felt, in terms of that, using Psalms 103, and in specifically verse 8 of that, is something that we can hang on to, that we can take with us out the front door of this church as we go into the community. Because if nothing else, Christianity is a faith that believes in relationships. It's not just for me as an individual. It is for me in the connection to the community. And the Psalms give us some clues about how we will do that. So, honesty as being the basis for living. One of my wife's favorite authors is Alexander McCall Smith, the something about the Ladies Detective Society or something like that. He's a wonderful writer, Scottish writer, and he's written quite a few books. This guy is one of the most prolific authors I've ever heard, but there's something he said, and I know you can't read this, I'll read it. There was corruption at every turn, and those who stood for honesty and integrity were more and more vulnerable, more and more isolated amongst the hordes of people who simply had no moral sense. Now, is that an accurate description of where we've been, where we are, where we might go in here? You know, I'm not one of these people who wants to play ain't it awful, that this is the worst of times. I think it has the potential for being the best of times. But what he is suggesting in his writing in one of his novels is that those who stood for honesty and integrity were more and more vulnerable. Maybe that's where we are right now. Another one, whoever is careless with the truth in small matters cannot be trusted with important matters. That's Albert Einstein. So it doesn't begin with a big lie. It begins with the dishonesty of little things. And the Psalms really do present that to us, that we can see the chosen people making their steps away and failing sometimes and getting up and trying again and then. That's an important part of it. So what the Psalms offer us is a powerful aid to unhide, to stand honestly before God without fear, to face one another vulnerably without shame, and to encounter life in the world without any secrets that would demean or distort our humanity. This is written by David Taylor, who has written a very, very good book, very new book on Open and Unafraid about the Psalms and how we can use the Psalms as a part of our life. So he's saying, without fear, it enables us to unhide the honesty. Think about your own prayers to God. Are you completely honest? Are we completely honest? One of the things about studying for this, preparing for this session, was for me to examine my own thinking here, and how is my prayer life? Am I completely honest? Is it just me asking for stuff? And I'm sure giving thanks. But where is that honesty that ought to be a part of our approach to the Psalms? And from a poet named Lawrence Wider, and this is taken from Psalms 130, the first 3 verses of it, and we will look at Psalms 130 later on in our study. Look in, my soul is glass to you, no vein or bone unseen, but you know all I pass through, all I do, ahead or inside me before I do it. Now, if we believe that, then how does that impact our sense of honesty? Honesty with ourselves, with our community, and with our God. And that's what we are encouraged to do through the Psalm. So, how to speak honestly. First one here. protect our tongues from deceit. Again, all over the Psalms, lots of discussion in there. Now, I have recently been introduced to a Bible, and I have a lot of Bibles. I've already, by the way, developed a stack that's going to go with me into the furnace. And a lot of them belong to my mother and all that. But this is the book. This is a book called The Message. Eugene Patterson, many of you may know who Eugene Patterson is. He has written many books, 43, I think. But I find the interpretation that he offers in here to be quite good in contemporary life. Now, I always have this on one side, and I have the New International Version or the Revised Standard Version on the other side. But this is out of the Message. This is a contemporary interpretation of protect our sons from deceit. Guard your tongue from profanity and no more lying through your teeth. All right, that's from Psalms 34, 13. Now, I had to practice this morning. As I mentioned, Susan's out of town. It's just the two dogs and me. They're small dogs, but they get up at 6 o'clock. So that's good, up at 6, on the river. We live on the river, so I could get on the river with the dogs at 6 o'clock in the morning, looking forward to coming back home and getting the cup of coffee that I had set up to brew last night to come on at 6 o'clock, and then to start what the British call my morning office. That's the reading of spiritual messages for the day. I got back, and I forgot to put the coffee urn on. Oh, yeah, you can just imagine. That was a real practice. I said, you got to practice what you preach on this profanity thing here. Now, just hold your tongue. There are often times where we really do have to practice, and we're giving many promptings to do that. So guard your tongue with profanity. And another one from the Revised Standard Version, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from seeking deceit. So another lesson here. Forgive our poor choice of words. And that is so true in our lives. We act before we think. We say things before we really think them through very often. So forgive our poor choice of words. And from a Revised Standard Version, I will guard my ways that I may not sin with my tongue. Some of the worst sins, we got to admit, comes from what we say. I will bridle my mouth so long as the wicked are in my presence. And this is from the 39th chapter of Psalms. I'm determined to watch my steps and tongue so they don't land me in trouble. I decided to hold my tongue as long as the wicked is in the room. And that's from the Message. So two different interpretations, but the same basic thing is choose our words well. To be honest in our dealings with others, to be honest in the community, to be honest in what this church is going to go through over the next 2 years. We've got to choose our words very, very carefully. All right. The third one, resist the urge to gossiping flatter. You've heard that from your parents growing up all of your life. Don't gossip, Lock your tongue. There. So resist that. It's one of the things of learning to speak honestly through to the divine. Now, this is a pretty harsh one here. This is out of the Message. Slice the lips off their faces, pull the braggart tongues from their mouths. There are times where I think that ancient justice might be effective. In there. But that's pretty hard. But it's what they're saying to us. If we want to be honest to God, if we want to honestly approach God and the community, our Christian community, then we've got to resist that urge to gossip and to flatter. And the flatter part of it, how many times have you had someone explain or introduce or discuss who you are, what you are, whatever it is, and it was just flatter. You know they didn't mean it. That happens to all of us. I mean, it happens to us amongst our best friends as we flatter for a purpose. But God is asking us to come forward without a lot of flattery. Now, we praise God. Yeah, the Psalms are full of praise. Not taking anything away from that. But don't flatter if you don't mean it. It's basically the message that I was getting at that. And the last one I mentioned to you here is choose to live with integrity. We've already heard what Alexander McCall Smith said about integrity and when people lose integrity. And what the Psalms tell us is, but thou hast upheld me because of my integrity and set me in thy presence forever. That's from the 41st chapter of Psalms. So what we are seeing here is a message through the Psalms to say integrity is important as we approach God in our prayer, in our praise, and in our paths of our daily living. You know me inside and out. You hold me together. You never fail to stand tall in your presence so I can look you in the eye. I like this one. This is a message. This is the interpretation, the translation from the Revised Standard Version. But I like the idea here of standing tall enough to look you in the eye. And that is true in our relationship to God, but it's also true in our relationship with each other. We got to stand tall enough through our integrity to look each other in the eye. Now, an honest prayer. Okay, listen. While I build my case, God, the most honest prayer you will ever hear. Show the world I'm innocent. In your heart, you know I am. Go ahead, examine me from the inside out. Surprise me in the middle of the night. You'll find I'm just what I say I am. My words don't run loose. That's from the 17th chapter of Psalms. How many of us can really say that? In the middle of the night, we all wake up every now and then that say, examine me. I've gotten it together. I am approaching you honestly. So honesty is reflected in a lot of different ways, and we get a meter reading, if you will, on how well we're doing. And the one that I'm going to show you here in a moment comes out annually. But let me just say to you that I'm a great believer in surveys. Every time I buy something from Amazon, I dutifully fill out the survey that follows a few days later. And my wife says, why are you doing that, about a package of double-seat Hanes or something like that, Why are you taking time to do that? I believe that people actually read it somewhere in the world. Somebody's reading the surveys. And maybe, just maybe, they're going to produce some better color choices or something like that, whatever it might be. But I believe in surveys. This one comes out every year. And some of you may be very familiar with it, but it's highly disturbing to me. And that is, how much confidence do we have in the honesty of our institutions? Now, I'm sorry, this is kind of off the page there, but you can get a sense of it here. Look at the top. This is from top to bottom. And this is what's saying the percentage of people in the survey that felt confident in these 10 or 12 institutions that we rely on every day as a part of our life. Small business scored the highest. I don't know whether that's a result of the pandemic or not, where we really found a new appreciation for small businesses and what people were doing to actually stay alive. The military was the next in the list there. It has still dropped 5 percentage points from a year ago. What's causing our belief that we're not getting an honest message coming out of our military, and we count on that. I can remember in the 70s where the military would have scored much, much lower than that after the time in the Vietnam. Fortunately, things have changed, and we're seeing the military in a different light. But then you get down to police. They're down to 45%. Now, only 45% of the people surveyed have confidence in the honesty of the police. The medical system also, and I don't know whether this is pandemic related. We had so much information going back and forth. One day it was this, one day, the next day it was something else, the next day it was something else. I don't know whether that contributed to people's response to this or not. I'm going to skip over the church a minute because that one deserves some more discussion. Public schools are not doing very well, now down to 28%. We're not believing that our children are being educated. We don't believe they're being educated honestly. And that's reflected in here. Organized labor, while it hasn't changed much over the last 2 years, there's been some increase in the belief that organized labor has a role. Look at what Amazon's doing, look what Starbucks is doing in other areas now. There is a bit of a movement in there. Don't know whether this will be different next year, but there have been times in the past this was quite low. Banks, and I know we have bankers in here with due apologies, I didn't make this up. It's now down to 27%. We're going through some pretty hard times ahead right now, but only 27% of us believe that there's honesty that really truly exists in our banking system. Large technology companies, we know that, especially the ones that are in the social media distribution type business. Here's one that's really troubling, and that is the Supreme Court. Now down to 25%, only a quarter of the people in the survey had confidence in the honesty of the Supreme Court. The presidency is even lower, down to 23%. Newspapers, I'm sorry, Bob Spear, newspapers now down to 16%. That's where we used to get all of our news. You can remember that. The morning was made complete by getting printer's ink on your hand. Well, you can't do that anymore. Yeah, you can, but it's not as much. But we relied on the media in there, the newspapers, the criminal justice system, now down to 14%. Big business, even about the same. Television news is down to 11%. We all understand that. How do we find honesty in reporting on, and most of us get our information nowadays from television. So we're saying that almost 90% of us don't believe what they're telling us that's on there. And then Congress, the people that we elect to go represent us and our values, down to 7%. I'm surprised it's kind of that high right now, quite frankly. We are going through a very, very challenging time. But let's don't dwell on that. This is not a political discussion. Let's go back up to the church and organized religion. Last year, 37%. This same time last year, this is brand new, 37% of the people. Still not very good. If you're going to go into the church business, would you go into a business where only 37% believed that you were telling the truth? Now it's down to barely above 30%. Why is that? Why has the church not been the pillar of truth? And you all know in this group here, we are going to go through some very challenging times in the United Methodist Church over the next couple of years. It would have happened even earlier, but COVID really prevented a lot of things, the conferences from being able to meet and this sort of thing. But this bothers me a great deal. I really love this church. I love this denomination. It is an enlightened denomination. I believe it, but it bothers me to think that we are now at that level of confidence in our churches that are supposed to represent us. So does the Psalms give us some pathway in here? Over 1,000 years when the Psalms were written, the children of Israel went through all kinds of things. There were times where they thought God was the end, and there were times when they were not certain that God even existed or not. All right, lesson learned, get through it fast. So there are some things here on reflection. In what ways have your family or community or culture shaped your thinking about honesty with God and with others? And what specific factors in your life make it difficult for you to be open and unafraid? Some of us are people pleasers, while others of us are utterly indifferent to how people perceive us. for both types in their own ways. It's difficult to be honest. And how can we accommodate this and avoid hiding it? And what are you afraid will happen if you are fully honest to God and with others, what feelings arise in you when you think about no longer hiding from God, being absolutely honest in how we approach God? I'm going to skip through these here, and get to this. It's a rocky road. The path going forward is a rocky road. We know that. But what better way than to use the Psalms to help us look at the honesty that is necessary to navigate the rocks and the roots that are going to be in our way. We have to do it as a church. We have to do it as individuals. We have to do it in our relationship with God. Thank you for coming this morning. We will be better equipped next week to move a little bit faster. Thank you, Elizabeth, for being a part of organizing all of this. And we'll close with a word of prayer. Father, as we walk out the front of this church, or whatever way we enter the community, help us to enter the community with a greater sense of our responsibility to be honest with ourselves, to be honest with you, and to be honest with the community within which we live. Go with us this week in all the decisions that we face, and let us see the light that you provide in our path. For it's in your name that we pray. Amen. Thank you very much for coming.